The penultimate episode of Loki is here, and wow, did it give off major Infinity War vibes. Albeit a little more hopeful than Infinity War, but still has the vibes. Loki Season 2, Episode 5, titled Science Fiction, was absolutely incredible and a great way to set up the finale. Welcome back to Fantasy Theory, and I'm going to break down, theorize, and look at Easter eggs for the latest episode of Loki. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, it really helps the channel. Anyway, let's just jump right into it. The episode starts right where we left off in episode 6. The radiation's coming right at Loki and friends. Instead of zooming into Loki's face, the camera zooms out, like whatever it did was finished. Loki is all alone. A theme for this episode. Loki does not want to be alone. He wants to be with his friends. Now, it's possible he time slipped to this moment before the loom exploded, or it's possible the loom kind of pushed everyone besides Loki into a branch timeline. We get this weird vibe that the TVA has kind of been abandoned. No one's there, it's quiet, sirens going off, just all a weird vibe. Loki passes a few signs that read the temporal code life-saving protocols and temporal radiation. The voice on the loudspeaker says TVA code 1229 initiated. Loki realizes the time slipping issue is back. Loki is obviously not happy because I can only imagine how frustrating it can be. Only in this episode it will eventually come in handy. We get this visual of Loki in a doorway, and it's kind of representing of how Loki is kind of trapped in this circular box, like how he's destined to fail and how the theme of the show has been circles. The hallways, the doorways, the lights, all circular, and Loki has to try to break that in this show. Loki time slips to the future, but only like a few minutes into the future, where he sees himself and says hello before time slipping again. He time slips back a few minutes ago again and walks into the TV room with the monitor that's showing the failed safe mode initiated. He picks up a TVA book, and thank God he did, because that will come in handy later on in the episode. Loki hears himself say hello from the previous encounter. It's a little confusing how the time slipping works, but these moments happen minutes apart, maybe even a minute apart, so it's showing that Loki can time slip really anywhere and overlap any moment in time. The TVA starts to spaghettify, and Loki is able to time slip out of there. The TVA monitor now reads, "Thank you for your service." I gotta ask, like, did the TVA put this message there in case something like this were to happen? Or, like, obviously, yes, they did, but did they know an event like this could occur? Now, I normally don't mention the Loki intro card, but I will now because the Loki letters start to disappear one by one, kind of foreshadowing each one of his friends spaghettifying later in the episode, one by one. Now, this episode is basically seeing what Mobius, Casey, B-15, and Obi's lives were before the TVA. Loki pretty much gets the band back together in this episode. We start off with Casey, who is a prison inmate in Alcatraz. The year is 1962, and it's a branch timeline. We see Casey and the other inmates, who, might I add, are the Angelin brothers, who directed the episode as well as 3 other episodes of Loki. They are escaping Alcatraz, and this is just like the movie Escape from Alcatraz. We learn Casey's name is Frank, who Frank is the main character Clint Eastwood plays in the movie. And I gotta add, this isn't the first time Marvel has done something like this, especially in the Loki show. As we know, Loki was B.D. Cooper in an earlier episode in Season 1. They don't back down from real-world events. Loki time slips out of there to numerous places, showing he is not in control of it. Not yet, at least. He time slips to Sylvie's McDonald's for a second, Mobius's jet ski dealership, and then back to the TVA, which I believe the room he time slips in is the room in Season 1, Episode 1, when Loki watches all of the events in his life play out. As we see on the wall, it does say Time Theater, and also has the number on the wall 25. The next branch timeline we go to is B-15 in New York in 2012. We see she is a doctor. This time being the year Avengers 1 takes place in the Battle of New York. As we remember, this is when Loki took on all of the Avengers. I don't know if this battle happened in this branch timeline or if it's happening right now. I don't really know, but I just wanted to point that out. We then see Mobius on his jet ski. He's a jet ski salesman. This is a branch timeline in 2022 in Cleveland, Ohio. Also, another thing I have to point out, Mobius says they have great donuts there. Kind of like Mobius in the TVA, who has a bit of a sweet tooth. When Loki time slips into the timeline, we get a shot of him basically mimicking the blow-up doll. Another instance that this shows he has no control, kind of like how this blow-up doll is. There's really no control of their movement, and they can go literally anywhere. But is it anywhere? Because we will learn later on from Obi, he only time slips to where his friends are. But we'll get to that later. Loki tries to convince Mobius to come to the TVA. From what we got from Casey, he won't know what Loki is talking about. He says, "No, I think you mean ATV, not TVA." After some explaining, he time slips to Obi. Obi, who's in a branch timeline in 1994 in California, he's a fiction writer as well as a scientist. And also, he is the easiest to convince. He takes the books off the shelf in the library that we will find out is his book, that book being the Zartan Contingent. Other books on the shelves are the Ghostwriter, the Last Library, Disclosure, and another Ghostwriter book. So he's basically been trying to buy his book to, I guess, drive up sales and kind of hype himself up. But once they realize the author is him, they realize he's been putting his books in the library and they tell him to stop putting his books on the shelves. In this timeline, he's a struggling writer. I wonder if his fiction books have any inspiration from Victor Timely here as well. As we know, Obi in the TVA took inspiration from Victor. I wonder if that carries over to this branch timeline. I'm not really sure. He says these are science fiction books, and she says nobody wants to read those here. I don't know if that this time people are just not into it as much, but it's weird to me that she said that. Anyway, we see where Obi does all of his work. Looks very similar to his workshop at the TVA. And again, the theme circles kind of plays into this because it's a very circular room. Loki is able to convince him easily as Obi says this is a dream come true, that his characters are coming to life. Now, I think this supports the theory that Obi was kind of the founder of the TVA, or one of the founders of the TVA. It seems Obi has had things written from the MCU in his book. For example, all those sticky notes on the wall, some of them are Marvel events and could possibly spoil the finale. The notes read that there is a sacrifice that will happen, perhaps predicting the finale. Now, I don't think it's Loki. Could be the Victor Timely sacrifice. I'm not sure. Could be nothing, but just wanted to point that out. Now, the book Obi wrote is called Sons of Yorin. Could be a play on Loki and Thor being the sons of Odin. Like I said, he's a fictional writer, and he says once Loki comes in, one of his characters comes to life and needs help. Obi figures out that Loki's time slipping may not be as random as it seems. Loki is time slipping to where all of his friends are, so maybe he can figure out a way to control it. Obi says science is what and how, while fiction is why. Loki has to answer the question later with Sylvie, so we know there's reasoning now as to why he needs to do this is not true. That's why he can't control the time slipping yet. We get this hilarious scene of him trying to time slip, but obviously it doesn't work out. After it doesn't work out, Loki would rather focus on the science rather than the fiction. Maybe because he knows the real reason why it's not working, but doesn't want to admit it. After Obi explains they need a tempad, Loki, who thankfully took it earlier, gives him the TVA book to make the tempad. I say thankfully because Obi said it would take a whole life to make the tempad without the knowledge of it, so now that he has a TVA book, it's substantially easier for him to do it. And just in good timing, Loki time slips back to Mobius, who, as we heard him say before, is a single dad. Now, there are just a ton of references to Thor and Loki here. Mobius has 2 kids, one being Kevin and one being Sean, and they are just like Thor and Loki. Kevin being like Loki, stealing matches, burning toys, not listening, and Sean being the opposite like Thor. They even have red and green bikes, which I want to point out, Sean, who is like Thor, is riding the red one. When Loki approaches Mobius, he says the phrase that Mobius said in season 1, a beautiful union of form and function. This is exactly what Mobius said to him in season 1, proceeding with, we call them jet skis. So Loki made that connection himself. Mobius says his wife is long gone, and I'm not really sure if they are divorced or if she's passed. I assume she's passed, but you let me know what you think. When Loki starts to freak Mobius out, we see Mobius almost kind of wind up to hit Loki with that tool in his hand. Out of nowhere, Obi comes out of the portal using a tempad he made. When Loki says, how did you create it so fast? And Obi reveals it's been 18 months. So we know Loki time slipped 18 months into the future. Loki recruits Mobius with a moving speech on why they are friends. Mobius's priorities, though, are his 2 boys, and that's what's most important to him. Loki says that they are doomed if he doesn't help them, just like the whole timeline. Loki shows Mobius that he could come back at any time, but I want to bring up, how does this work? Like, we see him play the events that just happened when Loki shows up at Mobius's house, but like, what happens after? Does Mobius actually end up hitting Loki with the tool to get him to go away? Or do the events just kind of keep playing out? As we know, they could kind of time slip to any moment in time. This time travel stuff's a little confusing, but hey, when is it not? We get a quick version of Loki recruiting B-15 and Casey, and then we see Sylvie, who's working at that same McDonald's and now has the same pickup truck from earlier. Loki is about to give her the same speech she gave everyone else when she says she remembers everything. She offers Loki a drink after she sees him time slip, which is the second time in this episode someone offers Loki a drink. The first time being Mobius at his house a little earlier on. They go to a bar and we see an arcade machine with the game Zaniac on it, which Zaniac is the movie Brad starred in an earlier episode, and it's also the real-life Marvel character. Don't know if there's any correlation, but the Zaniac with Brad was on the Sacred timeline, and Sylvie, as we know, is in a branch timeline. I don't know if they connect in any way, or if it's just like in all timelines it's like that. Also, her McDonald's started to spaghettify. First instance this is starting to happen in other timelines. Loki calls Sylvie selfish for not caring about the situation and just letting it be when Sylvie comes right back at him with him being selfish for trying to save them. Because he admits admits that the reason why is because he wants his friends back. The same question Obi asked him earlier and he couldn't answer correctly. Loki breaks down and says he doesn't know where he belongs without them. It's a very emotional scene, but we see Loki is vulnerable and afraid. I also gotta add, she orders 2 bourbons, but does not pay for them. So what's up with that, Sylvie? Loki comes back to Mobius and everybody and tells them to just go home and that there's nothing for them to do. When we then see Sylvie at a record store talking to the worker, he calls her his only regular there, so we know she frequently goes there. We see the record spinning again, which is another circle of a predetermined flow. She listens to Velvet Underground when we see everything start to spaghettify. The worker's cup, the coffee, everything outside the shop, all the records, and eventually the shop worker. Her branch timeline is spaghettifying, so this leaves Sylvie with no choice but to help Loki. She uses He Who Remains device, his wrist device, to portal out of her timeline, which I had no idea she actually had that. When there's a glimmer of hope, this is where we get that Infinity War-like scene of everyone spaghettifying, one by one, just like the title card. First Casey, then Obi, Mobius, B-15, and Sylvie. This happens until Loki is able to control his time slipping. He's able to control it now because it's about who, not where, not how, not why. This ultimately breaking Loki's circular loop that he's been stuck in all season and, well, all his life. Loki delivers one of the best and bone-chilling lines in the MCU, I have to say, when he says, "I can rewrite the story," and then time slips to what I believe to be the moment right before Victor Timely dies, and then the episode ends. Also, if you didn't notice, there's a post-credit scene, not really a post-credit scene, but post-credit message. It's just X5 saying, "You died, insert your coin, loser." You can hear this at 44 minutes and 30 seconds. Oof, that was crazy. Now, what does that ending mean? I think Loki will stop Victor from becoming spaghetti. Maybe bringing every character to a moment where the loom was stable enough to approach, or he would just do it himself. As we saw in the mid-season trailer, he does go out there with no suit on, so maybe he just takes matters into his own hands rather than putting his friends' lives in danger. But is Victor Timely really his friend? There's a lot of places this next episode can go, but I'm curious to hear where you guys think it will go. Is the TVA doomed, or will Loki save it and possibly lead it? Maybe we'll get a reveal Obi was the original He Who Remains, or was one of the founders. Will we get a big speech from Mobius about not wanting to know about his life outside the TVA? So many questions and things I want to see. I also believe we will see Renslayer as well as Miss Minutes again, but you let me know below if we'll see him again. As we know, this show will lead into Deadpool, Avengers 5, Kang Dynasty. Anyway, let me know what you thought. Are you excited for the next episode? What do you think will happen? This has been Nick from Fantasy Theory. Like and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one. Have an incredible day.